William Saliba will not need surgery, but he will not be walking back into the Arsenal defence anytime soon either. That confirmation has just landed, and it changes the picture for everyone connected to this club right now. Extensive medical assessments have been completed. The conclusion is that surgery is not required. Instead, Saliba is beginning a managed recovery programme immediately, and he is expected to be out of action for an extended period. There is no firm return date attached to that statement, and that absence of a timeline is exactly what makes this moment so tense. Think about where Arsenal are in this transfer window. They are chasing a marquee midfielder in Bruno Guimarães. They are exploring wide options in Diomande, Ferran Torres, and Nico Williams. They are weighing up centre-backs because their most dependable one just went down. And they are trying to finalise a forward signing in Christos Tzolis. Every single one of those moving parts now has to be viewed through the lens of a squad that has just lost its best defender for an extended stretch, with no surgery to explain a clear recovery date and no certainty about exactly when he comes back. Here is what is genuinely at risk. Arsenal built their identity over the last 2 seasons on defensive control, and Saliba has been the foundation of that. Losing him for an extended period without a clear timeline means the club cannot simply plan around a fixed return date. It means every centre-back conversation happening in the background right now, the ones involving Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Maxence Lacroix, and Raul Asensio, suddenly carries more weight than a simple depth signing. If Arsenal misjudge this moment and treat it as a minor knock, they risk starting the season light in a position that has been the backbone of their success. If they overreact and panic buy, they risk disrupting a squad that otherwise looks close to fully formed. Before we go further into every confirmed detail and every rumour swirling around the club right now, if you want the full picture on every one of these moving parts, broken down without hype and without noise, that is exactly what this channel is built for. Hit that subscribe button if you want deeper analysis like this delivered the moment these stories move. Now let us go through everything piece by piece so you know exactly what is confirmed and what is still just talk. We start with the forward position, because this is the piece of business that appears closest to being finished. Christos Tzolis will be announced by Arsenal on Thursday. That is the information circulating from a well-connected voice in the football press, and it comes with a green check mark and a Greek flag attached to it, the kind of marker used when a deal is being treated as effectively done rather than speculative. Alongside that, we are told Tzolis will wear the number 17 shirt at Arsenal. A leaked image has also emerged showing him in Arsenal home colours underneath a large welcome graphic, smiling directly at the camera in the red and white kit with the crest clearly visible on his chest. Here is the analysis. When a transfer reaches the stage where shirt numbers are already being reported and imagery is already circulating, that tells you the paperwork is in its final stages rather than early negotiation. Clubs do not leak kit photos during exploratory talks. They leak them or they get leaked, when a deal has been agreed and the only thing left is the formal announcement. Arsenal bringing in a wide forward at this stage of the window suggests they see a gap in that attacking department that needs filling before the season starts, and doing it early gives a new signing time to integrate before competitive matches begin. This is not a rumour at this point, this is a done deal waiting on an official club statement. Next we move to the biggest storyline connected to Arsenal this week, and that is Bruno Guimarães. According to Sky Sports, Bruno Guimarães definitely wants to move to Arsenal, and the expectation from that source is that Arsenal will make a formal move sooner rather than later, because talks have already progressed so far behind the scenes that it would be strange for this not to conclude with a transfer. That is a strong statement, but it is still a stated expectation from a broadcaster, not a confirmed transfer, so we treat it as an informed rumour with significant weight behind it rather than a done deal. From there, a separate source tells us that talks between Arsenal and Newcastle are being facilitated by an agent named Giuliano Bertolucci, who is currently in London specifically to help broker an agreement between the two clubs. Personal terms between Guimaraes and Arsenal have already been agreed. What remains outstanding is the transfer fee itself, the number that Arsenal and Newcastle need to agree on for the two clubs to shake hands. There is described growing optimism behind the scenes that this negotiation will progress in the coming days. Building on that, we are told Arsenal have formalised a new proposal worth €80 million plus €5 million in bonuses for Bruno Guimarães, and that the same agent, Bertolucci, is in London conducting those negotiations and trying to find an agreement between the two clubs. Here is where we need to be precise, because the reporting continues to build on itself. A separate account of this story describes Arsenal making 2 earlier bids through intermediaries, one worth £55 million, a second worth £65 million, and both of those were rejected by Newcastle. It then describes a third, formalised bid worth €85 million in total, broken down as €80 million guaranteed, and a further €5 million in add-ons. That matches the numbers reported elsewhere, so we can treat the figure itself, roughly €85 million in total value, as consistent across multiple lines of reporting, even though the deal itself remains unresolved and unofficial. Now here is the detail that stands out the most. Personal terms over a 5-year contract have reportedly been completely agreed between Guimaraes and Arsenal. And Arsenal have reportedly agreed to insert a release clause worth €150 million into that contract, should the move actually go through. This is described as unusual because Arsenal do not typically accept release clauses of this kind in player contracts. It is a notable shift in approach if it is accurate, and it signals just how determined the club is to get this specific deal done, even if it means agreeing to conditions they would not normally accept. My analysis on this is simple. A €150 million release clause on a player who will turn 29 years old later this year is, on the surface, a strange thing to insert into a contract. Once a player crosses into his 30s, the market value for that kind of fee becomes very difficult to justify for almost any club in world football. But the presence of that clause tells you something important about how this negotiation actually unfolded. It suggests Newcastle or Guimaraes himself wanted a safety valve built into the contract, and Arsenal were willing to give ground on that point specifically to get the personal terms and the broader agreement over the line. It costs Arsenal very little in practical terms because no club is realistically going to trigger a €150 million clause for a player heading toward his 30s, but it gave Newcastle or the players' camp something to point to as a concession. That is a smart piece of negotiating from Arsenal's side, even if the number attached to it will not mean much in practice. To summarise where Bruno Guimarães stands right now, he wants the move. Personal terms are agreed. A release clause has reportedly been built into the contract, and the only outstanding piece is Arsenal and Newcastle agreeing on the final transfer fee, with a third bid worth roughly €85 million currently on the table. This is still technically a rumour in terms of the transfer itself being completed, but it is a rumour sitting one step away from becoming official confirmation. Moving on to a completely different kind of situation, we have John Stones. Arsenal are described as holding an advantage over Chelsea in the race to sign the free agent defender. The reasoning given is that Stones favours staying in London, and his existing relationship with manager Mikel Arteta gives Arsenal a slight edge in that race. Chelsea remain firmly interested regardless, and Juventus and Everton are also mentioned as being in the picture for his signature. Separately, we are told that Stones is on Arsenal's list in defence, alongside Aaron Wan-Bissaka, but specifically not at a valuation of £25 million, suggesting Arsenal have a different number in mind or a different structure to that particular deal. Since Stones is a free agent, there is no transfer fee involved here in the traditional sense, which makes this a completely different type of negotiation compared to Guimaraes. This is about wages, contract length and personal preference rather than club-to-club fee negotiations. An existing relationship with the manager is a real factor in free agent decisions because it removes a layer of uncertainty for the player about tactical fit and squad role. That said, this remains firmly in rumour territory. Multiple clubs are described as interested and nothing here suggests an agreement is close. Arsenal simply appear to have a genuine edge in a competitive race. Now to Yan Diomande, and this is one of the more complicated situations on this list. Arsenal have reportedly made an inquiry for Diomande, with the fee expected to be well over £100 million. Diomande has made clear that he favours a move to Paris Saint-Germain, with personal terms already understood to be in place for a 5-year deal on that side. He is also described as preferring to play on the right side of the pitch, even though he is capable of operating on both flanks. A separate report gives us more context. After Arsenal withdrew from the race for Morgan Rogers, once Aston Villa demanded £117 million and Chelsea ultimately completed that signing, Arsenal turned their attention toward Diomande instead, with talks still described as being at an early exploratory stage. Leipzig's valuation of the player is put at around €120 million, which converts to roughly £102 million. But according to a report from a well-known transfer voice, the real problem for Arsenal is not the fee at all. It is the position. Arsenal need a player specifically for the left side, and Diomande wants to play predominantly on the right. This is worth sitting with for a moment because it reframes the entire story. Money is rarely the true obstacle in a deal like this if a club is genuinely willing to spend over £100 million. The real obstacle here is tactical. Bukayo Saka is the undisputed starter on Arsenal's right flank. Noni Madueke was signed only last summer to operate in that same area. And young academy talent Max Daumann has also been getting minutes specifically on the right side. There is simply no obvious space for Diomande to play his preferred position, even if Arsenal were to win the financial negotiation outright. Add to that the fact that Paris Saint-Germain are currently struggling to close their own deal for him, which is precisely why Arsenal have found an opening to explore this at all. My reading of this situation is that unless Diomande is willing to change his stance and commit to playing predominantly on the left, this move is very unlikely to progress no matter how much money Arsenal are prepared to spend. This remains a genuine rumour, and one with a significant structural obstacle sitting in front of it. Next, a story that does not involve Arsenal directly signing anyone, but which matters to the broader landscape of this transfer window, and that is Vinicius Junior. Vinicius Junior's camp has reportedly stopped contract renewal talks with Real Madrid. His representatives will not resume negotiations unless Madrid significantly improve their current proposal. A major financial gap is described as remaining between the two sides, which raises the genuine possibility of a summer exit if no agreement is reached. This is not an Arsenal story on its face, but any Arsenal analyst worth their salt tracks stories like this closely, because a top-level attacking talent becoming unsettled at one of the biggest clubs in the world always sends ripples through the entire market. If Vinicius Junior does become available, every major club with ambition will at least ask the question, even if the financial scale of that deal would be extraordinary. Right now, this is purely a Real Madrid contract standoff, with no Arsenal connection stated, but it is a situation worth monitoring given how quickly these dynamics can shift once a gap like this becomes public. Now to Julian Alvarez, a name that has been described directly as Arsenal's dream target. According to a well-sourced voice in the football media, Alvarez's release clause sits at €500 million, an enormous figure by any measure. However, there are reportedly provisions that allow certain Champions League clubs to trigger that clause for a reduced figure, though even that reduced figure is still described as likely being out of reach for most clubs in world football. If that reduced provision landed somewhere around €150 million, taxes would still need to be paid on top of that number, which is exactly why almost no club is currently looking seriously at actually triggering the clause. It is also mentioned that Andrea Berta, who brought Alvarez to Atletico Madrid in the first place, would know the specific details of that release clause structure better than anyone. The conclusion offered is that Alvarez may simply stay at Atletico Madrid. Barcelona could re-enter the conversation, but Arsenal should not be ruled out either, with the phrase used being that if there is even a 1% chance of Alvarez moving to the Emirates Stadium, Arsenal will make their move. My analysis here is straightforward. This is speculative at the furthest end of the rumour spectrum. A €500 million headline release clause, even with reduced provisions attached, represents one of the most expensive potential transfers in football history. Describing something as a 1% chance is itself an acknowledgement that this is not a live negotiation in any meaningful sense right now. It reflects genuine admiration for the player from Arsenal's side, and it confirms he is a name on their radar at the highest level, but it should be treated as aspirational interest rather than anything close to an active deal. Turning to central defence, where Arsenal's situation has taken on new urgency given the Saliba news. Aaron Wan-Bissaka and John Stones are both described as being on Arsenal's defensive list, though specifically not at a valuation of £25 million for whichever of the pair that figure was attached to. Maxence Lacroix was discussed briefly as an option, but he is described as destined for Chelsea instead. Raul Asensio, now considered surplus to requirements at Real Madrid, is floated as another name being considered. Separately, Arsenal's recent inquiry for Ezri Konsa revealed a significant gap in valuation between the two clubs. Arsenal understand the player's value to sit somewhere between £30 million and £35 million, while Aston Villa see his value closer to £60 million. Despite that gap, Konsa himself is described as wanting to join Arsenal. Here is what this tells us. Arsenal are clearly building a shortlist rather than committing to one single centre-back target, which is a sensible approach given how unpredictable defensive markets can be, especially with Saliba's recovery timeline now uncertain. The Lacroix situation moving toward Chelsea removes one name from Arsenal's list entirely, narrowing the field. The Konsa valuation gap of roughly double what Arsenal are willing to pay is a serious obstacle, even with the player's own willingness to join working in Arsenal's favour. Player desire alone rarely closes a £30 million valuation gap between two clubs. Asensio's situation at Real Madrid, being surplus to requirements there, could make him a more efficient value option if Arsenal decide to pursue a loan or a reduced fee given his lack of first-team opportunities at his current club. All of this remains firmly speculative, but the Saliba news gives every single one of these centre-back conversations added significance heading into the coming weeks. Finally, on the attacking and wide options beyond Tzolis and Diomande, we have a cluster of names worth addressing together. Ferran Torres has been suggested as a potential Arsenal target. There are also rumblings that Nico Williams could finally be open to leaving Athletic Bilbao after previous transfer sagas involving him did not progress. Both players have reportedly been discussed internally, but the price has to be right for either move to advance. Alongside those two, Eli Junior Krupi is also mentioned as a target, with a valuation attached of £85 million. This is early-stage speculation across the board. None of these three situations has progressed to the level of formalised bids or agreed personal terms, unlike the Guimaraes situation. What this does tell us is that Arsenal are casting a wide net across multiple attacking positions and profiles simultaneously, which is a normal part of any club's process during a transfer window, gathering information and pricing out options before committing resources to one specific target. Now let us move into the two situations that deserve the deepest level of scrutiny this week, because both carry real weight for how Arsenal's summer takes shape. The first is the full picture around Bruno Guimarães, and having already walked through the individual pieces of reporting, it is worth stepping back and analysing the complete situation as a whole. Newcastle are in a defensive position in this negotiation, and that context matters enormously. They have already sold Sandro Tonali and Anthony Gordon for significant fees in recent windows, and losing their captain on top of those departures would represent a serious symbolic and structural blow to the club. That is precisely why Newcastle rejected two earlier bids from Arsenal, worth £55 million and £65 million respectively, before Arsenal returned with a third, more substantial offer worth roughly €85 million in total value. What stands out to me most in this entire situation is the sequencing. Arsenal did not wait for the fee to be resolved before agreeing personal terms with the player. They secured the player's commitment first on a 5-year contract, and only after that did they push forward with an improved formal bid. That is a deliberate strategy. It signals to Newcastle that Arsenal are serious and prepared to escalate, while also locking in the most important variable in any transfer, the willingness of the player himself, before the two clubs finish negotiating the price. The release clause detail reinforces this reading. Agreeing to insert an unusually large release clause into the contract is a concession that costs Arsenal very little in practical terms given the player's age profile, but it likely helped smooth over any remaining resistance from Newcastle's side or the player's representatives during the personal terms discussions. Guimaraes, turning 29 in November, with 2 years remaining on his current Newcastle contract, adds urgency to this entire situation from Newcastle's perspective as well. They know his value is unlikely to increase significantly from here, and with 2 years left on his deal, this summer represents a natural moment to cash in if they are ever going to do so. All of that combines to explain why growing optimism is being reported behind the scenes, even though the transfer fee itself remains the final unresolved piece of this puzzle. The second situation worth a deeper look is Yan Diomande, because the obstacle here is fundamentally different in nature from a straightforward fee negotiation, and that distinction matters for how likely this deal actually is to happen. Most transfer stories that stall do so over money. This one is stalling over role and positioning, which is a much harder problem to solve through negotiation alone. Arsenal's right side of attack is currently occupied by their most important attacking player in Bukayo Saka, backed up by a summer signing from only last year in Noni Madueke, and further supported by academy graduate Max Diomande, who has already been given minutes specifically in that position. There is no natural gap for Diomande to walk into on the right, which is his stated preferred side despite being capable on both flanks. Layer onto that the fact that Paris Saint-Germain, his preferred destination, are currently struggling to get their own deal over the line, and you can see exactly why Arsenal have inserted themselves into this conversation. They are essentially positioning themselves as a contingency option in case his first choice move collapses entirely. But contingency interest built on a fee Arsenal are prepared to pay does not solve the underlying tactical problem. Unless Diomande is willing to fully commit to the left side of Arsenal's attack, this move simply does not have a realistic pathway forward, regardless of how much financial firepower Arsenal are willing to deploy. That is why I view this as one of the least likely deals on Arsenal's current list to actually be completed, despite the level of reported interest. Bringing all of this together, here is where Arsenal stand heading into the coming days. William Saliba is out for an extended period without a fixed return date, which adds real pressure to every defensive conversation currently taking place behind the scenes, from John Stones and Aaron Wan-Bissaka, to Maxence Lacroix moving toward Chelsea, to Raul Asensio being available at Real Madrid, to the significant valuation gap still separating Arsenal and Aston Villa over Ezri Konsa. On the attacking side, Christos Tzolis appears to be on the verge of a confirmed official announcement, with shirt numbers and leaked imagery already circulating, making this the most advanced and most certain piece of business on this entire list. Bruno Guimarães remains the headline transfer saga of the summer, with personal terms agreed, an unusual release clause reportedly inserted into his contract, and only the final transfer fee standing between Arsenal and completing one of the most significant signings of their window. Yan Diomande represents genuine interest undermined by a fundamental positional mismatch that money alone cannot solve. And further down the list, names like Julian Alvarez, Ferran Torres, Nico Williams and Eli Junior Krupi remain speculative possibilities rather than active advancing negotiations. What ties all of this together is a club that is clearly being active and thorough across every single position on the pitch, while simultaneously managing a defensive setback that nobody saw coming just days ago. How Arsenal balance those two realities, aggressive pursuit of multiple targets on one side and a significant injury absence on the other, will likely define how the rest of this transfer window plays out for them. That is everything confirmed and everything currently being reported around Arsenal this week. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure you are subscribed because these stories are moving fast, and the next update on Bruno Guimarães, Diomande, or the centre-back situation could land at any moment. I will be back with the next update as soon as there is something concrete to report. Thank you for watching.